Hello everyone, today we're going to learn about content analysis. What is content analysis? By definition, content analysis is actually a research tool to systematically summarize qualitative data in a quantitative way. Right? So sometimes it is usually used to simplify a large amount of data in a way that is easily understood in a quantitative way. It is also a study of recorded human communications which can come in different forms. And like I mentioned just now, the objective is to transform the large amount of text into a highly organized and concise summary of key results by sorting through the data into manageable categories on a variety of levels, either a word phrase or a sentence or a theme. This unit of analysis would be easier for the researcher to understand the whole amount of the text or data. And most importantly, it is also used in different formats. For this reason, it can cover books, whether websites, videos, film, audio recordings, letters, text messages, tweets, and so on. So as you can see, content analysis is very useful because it can actually quantify data that come in many forms, whether it can be textual data, it can be visual data in the form of moving film, or even it can be also recordings, which is audio recordings where it is later transcribed. So this is the usefulness of content analysis. Content analysis is also considered as an unobtrusive research, which means that it does not collect data directly from people. Unlike some other qualitative data, where we are required to get personal to the participant or the subject, content analysis does not require us to do that. Okay, there is no need for interaction with the participant or with the data itself or the people, but rather it is actually just analysis in a secondary level, right? What is more important is that it looks at the presence of meanings and relationships of words and concepts which are used by the people or the subjects. And then based on this, researcher would make inferences about the messages within the data itself, whether it is involving the writers or the participants or the audience and even the culture of different times and places. So this actually makes it very useful because using content analysis can actually help the researcher to look at different forms of data involving different subjects and participants in different contexts throughout different time. Okay. Basically, there are two types of content analysis. One is the conceptual analysis, where it involves the analysis of existence and frequency of concepts that are used in human communication, while the other is looking at the relationship between concepts in the human communication. For this matter, this lesson today, we're just going to be focusing on the conceptual analysis involving the existence and frequency of concepts that are used among humans in their daily communication. Apart from the two types of content analysis, there are actually two types of content that can be analyzed. One is manifest content, which is the observable content. These are referring to content that you can see, you can hear, or you can observe. Example would be the film or audio recording. The other is actually the latent content, where you actually try to analyze the underlying or the underlying meaning of the manifest content. So for instance, in the form of a transcription of an interview or an audio recording, this can be considered as a latent content. Now, let us go into the process of content analysis. The first thing that we need to have are the research questions. Research question is very important. The second thing is that we have to operationalize our variables. Just to remind everyone, this is actually where we define how our variable can be measured. Okay. And next is actually where we create a coding scheme. This involves the definition of the variables and how they will be coded within the selected recorded communication. Okay, so in the end, what we are going to look at is we are going to identify the variables that we have operationalized, and we're going to code these variables in a way where we can actually measure the presence or the frequency of the existence of these codes of the variable. I would like to go into detail in the process of creating a coding scheme. What we need to do is that first, we have to familiarize ourselves with the data. This can be done by reading and rereading it so that we can get a sense of the text as a whole in order for us to start formulating an idea of what the main points are. Next, what we need to do is to start dividing up the data into smaller parts while ensuring that the code meaning is still retained. This is done using coding units. A code can be thought of as a label, a name that most exactly describes what the particular condensed meaning unit is all about. And codes are usually 1 or 2 words long, and it just make easier to identify the connections between meaning units. The next step is that we are to apply the coding units in order to sort the data into categories. Now, a category is formed by grouping together these codes that are related to each other through their content or context. Right? And another thing we have to remember is that it is very important to look for commonalities and differences in the way people say things and contradictions that may be present in the human communications that are recorded that we have selected to study. Look at how these meaning units, codes, and categories are related. This is very important. Okay. I am going to show an example of how the processes can be involved through an example of a study. Let's take, for instance, the research question of cyberbullying in social media. Let's say a researcher wants to study cyberbullying that is happening in social media. So first, the researcher has to define what cyberbullying is. Perhaps he would find it as harassment, or when someone hurts another person, or when one is discriminated, and all these are being done through online communication, or in other words, the social media. Next is that the researcher has to identify the sampling frame where this data is being collected. So the sampling frame can be in terms of the types of social media. As we know, there are many types of social media. So which of the social media will the researcher use to examine or to analyze? Let's say the researcher would take Twitter and Facebook. Okay. What about the time frame? When would the researchers analyze the Twitter and Facebook postings? Would it be a week or a day or a month? So the researcher has to actually identify the time frame where the sampling is being selected. And then finally, what he or she needs to do is to reread and identify all the postings that are available or collected through Twitter and Facebook, and look at what are the codes that would represent the act of harassment or hurting people or discrimination that are being done online on the social media. And the example that I've shown here is that the codes come into several examples, which are body shaming, or ethnic or gender or religious discrimination, or this may include prejudice statements and others. And after that, the researcher would quantify all these codes into categories and into frequency or percentage. Let me show you through a visual data of how the process is resulted in the table as I'm sharing with you now. The codes, as I've mentioned, would be the body shaming. can be gender, it can be in color. And the categories for body shaming is actually physical discrimination, where it includes discrimination or prejudicial statements involving or concerning one's weight or even looks. Okay, now identify the description that you are going to have for each category. The example of postings that I've also identified from the different sources are, as you can see, some of the postings are actually reflecting discrimination of weight, and some are actually discriminating of the one's looks. Okay, and I've also identified here that the researcher has stated the dates where the tweets or the postings are taken from. And of course, you have to tally up with the frequency at the end of each of the codes and category. Okay, and as you can see for gender also, the researcher needs to identify the description, and here the description actually focuses on the discrimination of a female, right? And also in terms of the ethnic discrimination, and here the description mentioned that it's actually of a color. So the category is actually ethnic, but it refers to codes as the color as the skin color as the code. And the example of the postings show actually that the statements are discriminating one's color or the skin color. Okay, so this is an example of how you do a content analysis, and most importantly, the frequency or weightage of the percentage of the codes needs to be actually quantified or recorded in such a way that it is easy for you to see and identify, and you can actually trace the source of each of the codes too. The other thing that we need to know when we select a method of data analysis is that we need to understand the method's strength and limitation. For this method, content analysis also shares its own strength and limitation. The first is that it is unobtrusive, and it does not require the researcher to collect data from people. Basically, what you would do is perhaps you'll just be needing to watch television, or you'll be looking through the newspapers or magazines that are related to your research, and that you do not have to deal with people personally like interview does. The other thing is that it is also can be considered as low cost because you don't have to pay enumerators to fill out a survey or respondents to give honorarium to interview with, right? So in this sense, it is actually low cost. And it also allows you to look at magazine newspapers where you just look at the text, for instance, right? And the other thing is that it is also useful because it can be combined with other research techniques such as survey and participant observation. It is also considered as an easy technique to use and is objective simply because it is reliable, and it's a reliable way to actually analyze qualitative data because the coding units are not open to interpretation, so they can be applied in the same way over time with different researchers. And finally, content analysis also allows statistical analysis to be conducted if required, as there is usually quantitative data as a result of the procedure like I mentioned just now in the example where you use frequencies and weightage. Okay. However, content analysis, just like any other method, is not free from limitation. So some of the limitations is that it can be time consuming. When I say time consuming, I'm not referring to the time that is utilized to collect the data, but it is time consuming in the analysis of it. The familiarization of the data where the researcher is required to read and reread it. Okay, the act of coming up with a coding scheme. This could take some time. And it is also possible that there could be coding errors, especially when it involves relational analysis. The other thing that we need to remember that content analysis cannot establish causality, and it neither can actually extract deeper meaning or explanation for the data patterns that arise. So what we need to always remember that we have to make sure that we are using content analysis with the right objective, and that is for description purpose only. We actually have come to the end of the topic of today, which is content analysis. And in conclusion, I hope that you have realized and you understand that three important things, which are that content analysis is actually an unobtrusive research. It's actually a study of recorded human communications, and I hope you know that it is actually a descriptive, objective, and is able to quantify qualitative data in a quantitative manner. These three characteristics of content analysis is very important for you to understand before you would prefer to select it as your methods of data analysis. I thank you for your attention, and for further detailed process of content analysis, you can access the link to the YouTube that I've shared in this slide. And to evaluate your understanding on the topic, please answer the following quiz at the link provided. Thank you. Goodbye.